This is a message to anyone that wants to go on a mass shooting today. You're cowards. You're sick. You need to sit the fuck down and reanalyze your position in this world. I've studied your philosophies and manifestos. I understand what makes you want to kill people. You've dug so deep into hatred of other people and other cultures that you haven't even conceptualized those peoples as actual humans, yet you think the solution to your problems that you're facing is to kill? I'll tell you something. I've felt deep remorse for people in my life. Hell, I've even said things that I now regret. But I have never picked up a gun and killed someone, or even attempted to. However, in your case, you've seemed to go on random, sporadic shootings, killing random, innocent people, people whom you will never get to meet in your life. Think about that. These people will never get the chance to live their lives, and that's because you've decided to take it away from them. You chose to let your bigotry come first. Let's address the elephant in the room. A good number of these mass shootings have evidence in their manifestos indicating that they were inspired by the Great Replacement theory, a conspiracy theory you would only know about if you were involved with white supremacist circles. The question that I'd like to ask is, what were you doing in white supremacist circles to begin with?
Were you led there because of family? Were you associated through your small town? Was it the online forums on 4chan and 8chan? Were you alone when you became associated with a group of people? Depressed, perhaps? Maybe even suicidal? So, what about the Great Replacement theory that attracts you to it to begin with? It's probably the graphs indicating that white people are going to be extinct within the next 50 to 100 years. That white populations will be completely removed from their own countries. Is that what drives you to kill? So, let me ask you, what is the consequence for the white race depleting in the next abstract amount of years, hypothetically speaking? I'm not saying it will happen, but if it were to happen, what is it about that effect is driving you to kill people? Well, in the next generation of people, there would be less white people being born, and there would be more interracial parents. Now, would there be? Is there something wrong with that concept? Is there something wrong with the idea of interracial parenting on a grand global scale? I wouldn't enforce it. Of course, no one here would be enforcing it. It would happen naturally as society tend to do so. It just seems that you're so heavily focused on killing people of color, like Latinos in Walmart and the mosque in Christchurch, so I assume that according to your manifestos, that your primary focus is to stop race mixing. You don't want white people to have children with people of color, do you? Now, for the record, there will not be a total replacement of white people within the next 50 to 100 years because, quite frankly, that's not how evolution works, first of all. And secondly, it depends on how you view whiteness. Is whiteness defined based on purity? Does one have to have perfectly European blood within their genetics to identify as white? I identify as white, not proudly, but how do I know that I don't have a distant ancestor who isn't Egyptian, unless I did some research? Are you saying that a child who is born from interracial parents can't identify as white? Well then, it seems to me that the child is utterly worthless to you, aren't they? We're both people here. We can have this discussion about race, right? We're adults. There's no reason to shy away and throw a temper tantrum. I'm simply trying to get to know your psychology because it's so fascinating to me as to why You really want to kill people at the rate you do. We all know that the president has your back. I mean, the president is a fucking dumb fuck. But you do have an understanding as to why you're even implementing the harm you're causing onto society, right? I mean, do I have to say it? Alright, I'm gonna have to say it. You're advocating for a white ethnostate. You want to ethnically cleanse the world of immigrants, feminists, LGBTQ folks, and disabled people to create a master race of white people for yourself. You may be thinking that's a little too extreme even for you, that you'd fall down a slippery slope like that, or maybe you don't. But it has been proven that in all cases, white colonists will go after the next person to oppress. You've defeated the Mexicans in the Mexican-American War. You'll continue to invade Mexico after you killed every single person of color in America. You'll continue to invade every country until you've dominated every aspect of the globe. And then what? The days of imperialism ends? No. You'll split hairs even with your brothers and sisters over bodily makeup and what color hair you have. That's the trend of white fascism since its inception. So, it seems to me that there is no way possible to achieve a white ethnostate without inciting violence, because everything about the concept of creating a white ethnostate is inherently violent.
You might have noticed that recently the skeptics and the alt-right have been discussing things more, and one of the primary arguments I've seen being used during these live streams is the argument that an ethnostate cannot be formed without some violation of human rights or just outright violence. So I'm making this video in order to show that these things can be done without violence or human rights violations, and that by avoiding them now we're actually setting ourselves up for worse human rights violations in the future and certainly far worse violence.
Oh really? An ethnostate with no violence. Trust me, I'm already against the concept as it is, because an ethnostate requires you to at least remove certain people from a land which requires violence. But let's see what this perverted troglodyte has to offer to the table. And just for the record, this is why we don't platform fascist ideologies. Are we clear? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the first method I'm going to call the de facto method. This is the method where you simply take an area that's full of the people you want to preserve and declare it a state. In the context of America, you could take a couple of states like Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire and just say this is now a white ethnostate. You don't have to remove anyone for this method, and all you have to do is put immigration controls on those states. Since it's already a majority white area, any non-whites who are there will simply be bred out over time, choose to leave on their own, or simply live as a happy, unnoticeable minority in the state.
Okay, so making assumptions about the happiness of minorities in an ethnostate is flat out dishonest. Looking at states like Montana and North Dakota, which you want to colonize as a white ethnostate, you're assuming that Native Americans would live as a happy minority while you live in a white ethnostate there? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the Standing Rock Reservation had a pipeline non-consensually drilled into the ground along their river. When the protest broke out, the people building the pipeline said that they were going to direct the pipeline towards a different direction, but when white protesters started getting angry, the police came back to Standing Rock and implied that they were going to build that pipeline against their will. This pipeline violated the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 the Lakota Sioux tribe had with the United States. So if you think that we live in a peaceful society where the indigenous population, let alone any minority population, are to this day still segregated by the very system that massacred its ancestors, what makes you think that they're going to live prosperously and peacefully in a white ethnostate? Spoiler alert, they won't.
Method 2 adds on Method 1, where instead of just declaring a ethnostate and hoping that the immigrants who do live there eventually dwindle or disappear, we take an active approach to trying to remove the immigrants. We encourage them to return to their own homelands, and those that are resistant to returning to their homelands can be offered money or other benefits in exchange. Most of these immigrants come from countries where the currency is worth much less than the country they immigrated to. So you could even offer them something similar to the welfare that most of these people are already on. Smaller amount of welfare, but tell them that they can only receive it if they receive it to their home country. They can then use the power that this currency gives them in their homeland to get more bang for their buck. Most of the immigrants that are undesirable are only here for the benefits anyway. So by giving them the perks of living in our countries, while also giving them the perks of living in their home countries, they're probably quite likely to take that deal and spend German money in their home countries where they speak the language and actually feel like a part of the culture.
This is a grand disconnect that you and all anti-immigrants and all anti-refugee activists have when it comes to this problem. Immigrants who are coming from the southern border are doing so not because they want benefits, but because they are fleeing from drug cartels that America itself has been funding for decades. Since the Cold War, the United States provided Latin American countries weapons and training to fight off the Soviet Union, but it eventually created the drug cartels, which led civilians to flee up north. These people are fleeing from a violent narco state that the United States was involved in creating because they wanted to create a satellite state against the USSR. As for the refugee crisis in Europe, the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, and the first thing L. Paul Bremer did after they overthrew the government was gut the social programs and government jobs. These people, who were left with no jobs and no benefits, but plenty of arms from the war, eventually formed the coalition we now know today as ISIS. Not to mention that the war on terror could have been prevented during another Soviet conflict when the United States aided the Mujahideens in Afghanistan with arms in exchange for opium money. The entire Afghan economy was gutted for the drug war, and when the war was over, there was no Marshall Plan from the United States. My point is that the war on terror is something the United States created, and it needs to take ownership of that. Now, a common argument that I hear from very racist people when I make this point is something along the lines of, well, we bombed these people and ruined their land. Why would they come here? And my answer would be, because you owe them a fucking home, you asshat. You voted the leader that bombed them. You voted the president who created those drug policies. It's your problem. It's your problem. You should take an active role in society, like the rest of us, to pitch in and help. You know, instead of going on a fucking shooting spree.
Now, by using these two methods, all we're actually doing is reversing the process that got us in this situation in the first place. We're returning to the immigration policies of the past, we are sending all the shitheads back home, and we are making our countries back into the de facto white ethnostates that they used to be. Most European countries used to be majority European until the past few decades after the Second World War, where the countries rapidly filled with migrants. The important thing to remember here is that the state that we are living in right now isn't the natural state. It's completely different from the state we've been living in for the past thousands of years.
Do I even need to comment on how dumb he is? First off, the United States was never a white ethnostate. If anything, it was inhabited by indigenous tribes up until 1492, and also, fuck Christopher Columbus. Also, there were people of color in Europe dating the Renaissance, and possibly even far back. Guess what? There were black people in the Roman Empire.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
Want to know something really interesting about that period of time? They were actually not racist. You'd probably imagine that they'd make the Africans into slaves or something, right? Well, you'd be wrong, because the concept of race hasn't even been invented yet. You see, this is what I've been trying to tell you this entire time, you lost grasshopper. Race is a new concept created for one group to oppress another. And in the case of a white ethnostate, we have white people oppressing people of color.
I personally think that most of the European countries that have accepted a large amount of immigrants are beyond peaceful means for the most part. I think the first two methods should be used to try and get rid of the vast majority of the immigrants, but I'm also certain that there are a large group of immigrants who will not go peacefully. It's for these immigrants that I have no problem employing physical removal against them. We owe them nothing. Their residence in our countries is entirely benevolent. They are here because we have allowed them to be here, and we can stop allowing them to be here. When you combine this perspective with the idea that if the immigrant population keeps growing at the rate it is, that we're almost certainly bound for racial and religious conflict all throughout Europe, but that the use of physical removal now is absolutely justified.
Physical removal is a right-wing meme created by a bunch of anarcho-capitalists inspired by Augusto Pinochet's ability to throw communists out of attack helicopters. If he isn't joking, which at this point we should assume that he isn't due to the shootings we've had, he's just advocating for violence and genocide.
There has been no population switch like this in the past that ended peacefully. There has never been a situation where so many people who were so radically different slowly became the majority of the country, while the original native population slowly and peacefully died off. These things always end in violence and straight up ethnic cleansing and genocide. The only option we're left with to initiate the minimum amount of violence necessary is to remove these people now before they can become a sizable population. If you think that removing
Woo, lad. Okay, so I think we've had enough, folks. This individual definitely has some issues, and I would suggest that he gets some help from a therapist now while he can before he has access to firearms. But I hope that we learned something today. We learned why white supremacy isn't a legitimate ideology, and that a white ethnostate wouldn't hold any water without violence or oppressing any marginalized groups. Don't fall for dog whistles constructed by the alt-right to get you to buy into any of this crap. Do something else with your time, like play a video game. I just recently bought an Xbox 360 with Fable 3 and GTA 5. I think I'm going to go do that instead. But instead of holding deep hatred for immigrants and refugees, maybe you can try making friends with some of them. They're not bad people. They share this planet with you, and no soil belongs to anyone. If anything, if I didn't convince you to change your views, I hope I convinced you not to shoot people today.
Hey, thank you all for watching. Here's a shout out to all of my lovely patrons on Patreon. They send me wonderful messages about my videos, and it's so motivating to make more videos because of them. And also thank you to all of my viewers who take the time to watch my videos. I didn't expect to make this one or this one to become a fully fledged video, but it actually did become a fully fledged video. Actually, that's how a lot of my videos end up turning out. Not fully forced in any way, they just kind of happen, and I like that. Anyway, have a great day, comrades. And remember to subvert fascism anywhere you look.